Hello, my name is Haley Parker. I grew up in the heart of Manhattan, New York City, surrounded by luxury, endless parties, and people who only cared about status and money. But this isn't a story about glamour. This is about how one man with nothing taught me everything about love, life, and what it means to truly be rich. Let's start about my journey. My name is Haley Parker. If you'd met me 5 years ago, you might have thought I had the perfect life. I was the girl you see stepping out of a black Escalade in Soho. Sunglasses too big for my face, phone glued to my hand, always looking like I was rushing to someplace important, because I was. My world was packed with meetings, launch parties, gallery showings, brunches that cost more than some people's rent, and constant pressure to look good doing all of it. My family name opened doors that others had to claw through walls to get to. My dad was one of the biggest real estate developers in New York. My mom, a socialite who spent more time at charity luncheons than at home. And our last name, Parker, was on buildings, fundraisers, news headlines. I lived on the 45th floor of a Manhattan penthouse with windows so tall they framed the skyline, like art. I had closets full of designer, shoes I barely wore twice, and yet I can't remember a time I truly felt like I was walking in my own life. From the outside, I was that girl. People admired me, envied me, followed me online, sent me DMs asking for skincare tips, relationship advice, or even what kind of coffee I drank. I got more attention in a week than some people get in a lifetime. But the truth was, I never felt more alone. I had everything anyone could ever dream of, and still, I woke up each day feeling like I was suffocating under silk sheets. You know what's worse than being stuck? Being stuck in something beautiful. A golden cage is still a cage. No matter how soft the pillows are, no matter how sparkling the chandelier above you shines, if you can't breathe or speak your truth, it's just another kind of prison. My family didn't raise me to feel or question anything. I was groomed, polished, and placed like a product on a high-end shelf. My emotions were considered inconvenient. If I cried, I was being dramatic. If I showed anger, I was ungrateful. And if I ever wanted to explore a different life path, one that wasn't tied to legacy, deals, or public image, I was reminded that my job was to smile, show up, and make everything look perfect. There was this unspoken rule in our world: don't rock the boat. Everyone smiled too wide, complimented you too much, and everything was transactional. Relationships, friendships, even family. I had friends who'd drop me the second I lost my social status. Men who only dated me because of my name or what I could do for their careers. I remember once I brought home a guy I liked, really liked, and he spent more time talking to my father about investment opportunities than actually asking about me. My father liked him immediately. I didn't speak to him again after that night. My mother, bless her, was emotionally absent. She had mastered the art of pretending things were okay. I used to watch her powder her nose in the mirror. Lipstick always perfect, smile always photo-ready, even when I could see the loneliness in her eyes. She once told me, "Haley, men don't marry women who have too many opinions. Keep your voice light and your posture elegant." That stuck with me, not because I believed it, but because I saw how much she had given up to fit into this life. I didn't want to become that version of her. I remember this one night so clearly. It was a Friday evening in early October. That time of year in New York where the air starts to bite just a little, and everyone switching from iced lattes to pumpkin spice. The city was buzzing with Fashion Week events, and my schedule was jammed. I had been to 3 different shows already, changed outfits twice, and was heading to a 4th event downtown. I was sitting in the back of the SUV, stuck in traffic on 5th Avenue, and suddenly, I just froze. I stared out the window at a group of teenagers on the sidewalk, laughing, pushing each other around, holding coffee cups and skateboards, just being loud and messy and real. And I realized I hadn't laughed like that in months. I didn't even know if I could anymore. That night, I skipped the final event. I told the driver to head home, but halfway there, I changed my mind. "Take me to the Lower East Side," I said, almost without thinking. He looked back through the rearview mirror with a raised eyebrow, but didn't say a word. That's the thing about living in wealth. You get used to people not questioning you, but that silence starts to feel like a punishment after a while. I needed something different. I needed noise, life, maybe even chaos. I got out near Delancey Street, heels clicking on the uneven pavement, a coat that was worth more than some people's cars draped over my shoulders. For once, I felt totally out of place, and yet strangely free. I walked block after block, passing pizza joints, corner stores, buskers playing jazz, and groups of people just living their lives without cameras or curated posts. It was a side of New York I hadn't really experienced. Not since I was a kid, before the fame and pressure hit like a tidal wave. I ended up sitting on a random park bench under a flickering street lamp, phone buzzing with missed calls and unread texts from people I didn't want to talk to. I slipped off my heels, letting my bare feet rest on the cold cement, and just sat there, still, quiet, invisible. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to perform. That night cracked something open in me. I went home and stared at my reflection in the mirror for what felt like hours. I wasn't ugly. I wasn't old. I wasn't broken. But I also wasn't happy. And that terrified me. I started skipping events more often after that. Started asking deeper questions. Started saying no to things I used to say yes to automatically. And my world didn't like that. My father called it a phase. My friends stopped inviting me out. My assistant asked if I was depressed and offered to book a wellness retreat in Aspen. They all thought something was wrong with me because I stopped playing the game. But the truth was, I was finally waking up. Still, I felt torn, because while I was starting to see the cracks in my life, I didn't yet know what came next. I didn't have a plan. I didn't even have a dream. I just knew I couldn't keep pretending anymore. And then came the day it all really changed. Another Friday. Another storm rolling in. The sky over Manhattan was the color of steel. And everything felt heavier somehow. I told the driver to take me downtown again. No destination. Just drive. I needed air. I needed space. I needed something real. And that's the moment my life would shift forever. Because that's the day I saw him. It was the kind of gray Friday New Yorkers are used to. Skies heavy with rain. Streets buzzing with cabs honking. The air thick with the smell of wet concrete, coffee, and urgency. I hadn't planned anything that day. I told my assistant I needed space. Canceled everything on my calendar. Turned off my phone. And took the elevator down from the 45th floor like I was descending from a life that didn't fit me anymore. I wore a plain black hoodie, yes, Even rich girls have one hidden in the back of their designer-filled closets, and a pair of sneakers that had barely seen the sidewalk. No makeup, no glam, no performance, just me. I asked the driver to take me downtown again. No events, no stores, no people I knew, just somewhere that didn't expect me to be anything other than human. As the Escalade moved through the city, I stared out the window at the version of New York I had spent most of my life ignoring. The version without penthouses and private rooftop pools. The one with corner bodegas, chain-link fences, and murals painted on brick walls by hands that knew struggle. I was starting to feel something again. Something I couldn't quite name yet. Maybe it was hunger, not for food, but for truth. For something real. Something not packaged and approved by my family or my PR team. We ended up in the Lower East Side again. I told the driver to stop a block early so I could walk. As soon as I stepped out into the drizzle, the cool rain kissed my cheeks like a reminder. You're alive. Haley, no one cared who I was here. No one stared. No one asked for selfies. No one complimented my dress because I wasn't wearing one. I passed a row of old apartment buildings with fire escapes that zigzagged like metal skeletons, shops with handwritten signs, and diners that smelled like bacon and burnt toast and real conversation. My pace slowed as I approached a park I didn't even know the name of. It wasn't one of the fancy green spaces from uptown. No cute dog parks or curated rose gardens here. Just benches, puddles, and a few folks trying to stay dry under hoods and umbrellas. And then I saw him. He was sitting near the far side of the park, under a rusted-over awning outside a tiny bakery. He had a sketch pad balanced on his knees, and despite the drizzle, he kept drawing, his pencil moving fast like his hands couldn't keep up with his mind. He wore a gray beanie pulled low over his dark curls, jeans that looked like they hadn't been washed in a week, and a canvas jacket with paint stains in every color imaginable. His boots were scuffed, his fingers covered in charcoal, and yet he looked more grounded than anyone I'd ever known. Like he didn't need the world's permission to exist. He was just there, living without apology. I watched him for a minute, maybe two. Then, before I could talk myself out of it, I crossed the street and sat down on the bench beside him. He looked up, surprised but not alarmed, his eyes the color of coffee, dark, steady, a little tired, but kind. "Hey," I said softly, like I was trying not to scare him off. "Mind if I sit here?" He shrugged. "Public bench. Go for it." I laughed. It felt so normal, so easy. "What are you drawing?" I asked, pointing to the sketch pad. He turned it toward me. It was a pencil sketch of the street across from us. Rain falling. A couple huddled under one umbrella. A guy handing off a slice of pizza to a little kid. It was messy but alive, real, beautiful in a way that no Instagram filter could ever match. "It's amazing," I said. He smiled, and it wasn't the type of smile I was used to. The polite, practiced kind people gave me when they wanted something. His was warm, amused. "Thanks. You a fan of street art?" I hesitated. "I'm not sure. I've never really looked at it like this." "That's the problem with Uptown," he said, smirking. "Everything's polished. Nothing feels alive." I should have been offended, but he wasn't wrong. "I'm Haley," I said, offering my hand. "Jake," he replied, shaking it. His grip was rough, his palm calloused, hands that worked. Not typed emails or signed checks. We sat there for a while. I don't even remember how long. The rain kept falling, the city moved around us, and we talked about everything and nothing. Music, art, old movies, his favorite cheap diners. He told me about how he'd moved to New York with $50 and a dream, how he'd couch surfed for months, how he'd sell his art in the subway just to eat, how sometimes he still skipped meals to buy supplies. But he spoke with pride, not pity. He loved this city, every crack in the sidewalk, every struggle. He said the pain made the joy taste better. I didn't know what that meant back then, but I do now. He didn't ask me what I did or where I lived. He didn't seem to care about any of that. And for once, I was grateful. I didn't have to be Haley Parker, real estate heiress. I was just Haley, a girl with wet sneakers, sore feet, and a heart that had been aching in silence for years. When the rain got heavier, he offered to walk me to the nearest train stop. Even though I wasn't taking the subway, I told him I'd call a car. He didn't flinch, didn't make a comment or ask how I could afford it. He just nodded and said, "Cool, get home safe." That was it. No push. No follow-up. No phone number. Just a smile and a small wave as he turned the corner. But I couldn't get him out of my head. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling of my luxury high-rise, wrapped in 800 thread-count sheets, and all I could think about was the way Jake looked when he was sketching, focused, free, alive. I had spent so long pretending, performing, being the version of myself that others expected. And here was this stranger, who made me feel more seen in one afternoon than anyone else had in years. The next day I went back. Same park, same time. He was there again, this time painting on a small canvas propped up against his knee. I brought coffee, 2 cups, and held one out to him. He smiled like he'd been expecting me. "You came back." "I had to," I said. "I wasn't finished breathing yesterday." And just like that, it became our thing. I'd sneak away from my life, ditch meetings, skip events, turn off my phone, and go find Jake. Sometimes we'd walk for miles, down alleyways full of graffiti, into tiny bookstores, past mom-and-pop shops that still had 80s signage. He showed me a New York I'd never seen, the version that doesn't make it onto postcards or tourist blogs. He introduced me to street vendors who made the best halal chicken over rice, to a bar where poets read under dim lights, to rooftops where you could see the Empire State Building without crowds. And in return, I gave him my stories. I told him about the pressure, the loneliness, the suffocating expectations. I told him things I'd never said out loud before. And he listened. Really listened. Not like the people in my world, who nodded while scrolling their phones, or waited for their turn to talk. He looked at me like my words mattered. Like I mattered. Not because of my last name, but because I was a human being. There were moments when I wanted to tell him who I really was, to confess the truth about my background, my family, the empire I came from, but I held back. Not because I was lying, but because, for once, I wasn't being defined by it. With Jake, I was free. I could breathe. I could laugh without wondering if my laugh was too loud. I could eat pizza without worrying about carbs. I could be me. Those afternoons with him were like oxygen. I'd go home with paint on my jeans, messy hair, and a heart that felt lighter. But every time I walked back into my building, I felt the weight of my old world crashing down again. The doorman would nod stiffly. The elevator would ding with cold perfection. My mother would leave me voicemails asking if I was feeling off, and offering spa days or wellness retreats like that could fix what I was going through. They didn't know that I was finally starting to feel on for the first time in years. But deep down, I knew I couldn't live in two worlds forever. I had one foot in Jake's reality, raw, imperfect, beautiful, and one still tied to mine, with all its comfort and chains, and eventually I would have to choose. The thing about falling in love with someone like Jake is that you never see it coming. It doesn't start with fireworks or romantic music playing in the background. It starts with small moments, quiet ones, that sneak into your chest and make a home, there before you even realize what's happening. At first, I just thought he was an escape, a distraction from a world I no longer wanted to belong to. But the more time I spent with him, the more I started to see the depth beneath his quiet nature. The more we talked, the more I realized Jake wasn't a break from reality. He was reality. He was the truth I had been running from my entire life. After a few weeks of meeting in the Lower East Side, walking under scaffolding, eating $2 slices, and watching the city breathe without its makeup on, Jake and I started seeing each other more intentionally. I stopped pretending I was just passing by. He stopped acting surprised when I showed up. We didn't need fancy restaurants or scheduled plans. Sometimes we'd sit on rooftops and just stare at the sky. Sometimes we'd go to used bookstores and get lost in the smell of old pages. Sometimes we'd talk for hours. Other times we'd sit in silence and it was never awkward. It was peaceful. Being with him felt like exhaling after holding your breath for too long. Jake wasn't like anyone I'd ever met. He didn't care about money, not in the bitter, resentful way some people do, but in the purest way, like it just didn't define anything about his world. He lived in a tiny studio apartment in Bushwick, where the ceiling leaked when it rained and the radiator clanked in the winter. But he had turned that space into something beautiful. His walls were covered in canvases and sketches, stacked books, dried flowers taped to the fridge, paintbrushes soaking in old jars. It wasn't clean. It wasn't polished. But it was alive, and it felt more like home than any room I'd ever walked into. He invited me over one evening after we'd shared soup from a food truck on Bedford Avenue. I remember stepping into his apartment and feeling like I had walked into his soul. Every inch of that space reflected his passion, his struggle, his joy. He had a mattress on the floor, not a bed frame. One window. A little coffee machine, no Wi-Fi, no TV, but there was music, always. A record player spinning old jazz and soul, Nina Simone, Sam Cooke, Miles Davis, the kind of music that made your chest ache in a good way. He showed me a sketch he had done of me, without telling me. It wasn't glamorous. I wasn't smiling or posed. It was me sitting on a park bench in the rain, hair messy, hoodie half-zipped, staring out at nothing. And yet, it was the most me I'd ever seen captured. I stared at it for a long time, tears pushing at the corners of my eyes. "Why this moment?" I asked. He shrugged. "Because it was the first time I saw you stop performing." That sentence hit me like a freight train. No one had ever seen me like that before. Not my parents. Not my friends. Not the guys I used to date who only cared about my last name or how good I looked in photos. Jake didn't just look at me. He looked into me, past the walls I didn't even know I had. And he saw someone worth loving, even when I didn't feel like I deserved it. We started opening up more after that, talking about the things we were afraid of. I told him how I never felt like I belonged anywhere, how I was tired of being used as a trophy, a mannequin, a placeholder in someone else's perfect story. I told him how my father controlled every part of my life, from who I dated to what kind of photos I posted online. Jake didn't judge. He just listened. And then he told me his story. He grew up in Ohio, single mom, worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table. He used to draw on the back of old receipts and paper, bags because they couldn't afford sketchbooks. He moved to New York with nothing but talent and the belief that he could make something out of it. And for a while he did. He sold pieces at local shows, painted murals in Brooklyn, even got featured in a small online magazine. But when his mom got sick, he flew back home, drained his savings to take care of her. And when she passed, he came back with nothing. No apartment, no connections, no momentum, just grief and paint. Yet he never stopped creating, even when he couldn't afford rent, even when he couch surfed, even when he skipped meals. He told me, "Art saved me more times than I can count." That kind of faith shook me, because I had never truly believed in anything. Not like that. Jake never asked for anything from me. Not money, not help, not favors. He had no idea how wealthy I was, and I liked it that way. It kept us real. It kept me real. But it also made things complicated, because the deeper I fell for him, the harder it became to keep that secret. Every time he mentioned how broke he was or how he couldn't afford to buy new supplies, something inside me itched to help. But I couldn't, not without exposing everything. One night, we were sitting on the fire escape outside his apartment. It was fall, and the air had that perfect New York crispness. We were sharing a beer, legs dangling over the edge, city lights flickering like stars below us. He was telling me about his latest painting, how he wanted it to represent both chaos and calm, how he saw both in me. I turned to him and said, "Jake, why do you think we met?" He smiled and said, "Because something out there knew you needed to breathe again." I leaned my head on his shoulder, and in that moment I knew I loved him. Not in the butterflies and texting all night kind of way, not in the rom-com grand gesture kind of way. I loved him in the kind of way that made me feel human again, alive, worth something beyond status. But love comes with truth, and I knew mine was getting harder to hide. The tension started building. I'd disappear for days sometimes back into my other life. My parents would demand I attend events. My father started questioning where I was spending so much time. "Some downtown artist?" he sneered once. "You don't belong in that world, Haley." But he was wrong. For the first time in my life, I felt like I did belong. Just not in his world. Jake noticed I was holding back. He'd never push, but I could see it in his eyes. The worry, the confusion. One evening, he asked, "Do you ever think there's something you're not telling me?" I froze. My heart pounded. I wanted to tell him everything. That I was worth millions on paper. That I lived in a building with doormen and private elevators. That my father would never approve of him. That I was scared of losing everything, but more scared of losing him. But I didn't say any of that. I just said yes. That moment hung in the air like a fog that wouldn't lift. He didn't press. He just nodded, looked out at the skyline, and whispered, "I hope one day you'll trust me enough to let me in all the way." That was the night I realized we were no longer just two people sharing afternoons in the city. We were falling into something deep, real, terrifying, and I had a choice to make. I went home that night and stood in the massive marble bathroom I hated. I looked at my reflection under soft, expensive lighting and asked myself a question I had avoided for months. What kind of life do you want to live, Haley? One where you're always admired, envied, and lonely? Or one where you're deeply loved and fully seen, even if it costs you everything? That question haunted me every morning, every night. Because the truth is, Jake had changed me, not just by being kind or talented, but by showing me who I really was underneath the glitter. And once you see yourself clearly, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to pretending. I knew the time was coming. The moment when my two worlds would collide. When the secret I'd kept would have to be told. When Jake would either understand and stay or walk away, hurt that I hadn't trusted him sooner. But before I could do that, something happened. My father found out. When you live in two different worlds, there's always a ticking clock somewhere, in the background, counting down to the moment they collide. I had been trying to stretch time, hold on to both sides of my life like I could balance them in my hands. But balance was never possible. Not between two realities that were so wildly opposite. And deep down, I always knew that. I just didn't know how fast it would all unravel. It started with a call from my father's office. Nothing dramatic, just a firm-toned message from his assistant, asking me to swing by for a meeting. That was unusual. My dad didn't summon me to the office unless something was wrong, or unless he wanted something from me. So I went, dressed carefully in a beige coat and black turtleneck. Just enough polish to signal respect, but not too much to seem desperate. I rode the elevator up to the 47th floor of Parker Tower, a skyscraper that bore our name in silver letters on the side. I had never liked the building. It always felt cold, like the walls were listening. I walked into his glass office and sat across from him without saying a word. He looked up slowly, his eyes cold and calculating, eyes that had negotiated billion-dollar deals and didn't flinch during market crashes. "We need to talk," he said. "About this artist." My stomach dropped. My mouth went dry. I had never said Jake's name to anyone in my family. I never posted about him, never brought him near anyone in my circle. But my father? He had resources, eyes, people. I should have known. He leaned back in his chair. "You've been seen. With him. Multiple times. Lower East Side, Bushwick. Someone sent me photos." He slid an envelope across the table like this was some corporate sting operation. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I already knew what was inside. Images of me and Jake walking hand in hand down graffiti-covered streets, laughing over coffee, sitting shoulder to shoulder on a park bench. "You're being reckless," he said, voice low but sharp. "Do you have any idea what this could do to our name? To your future?" And there it was, the "our name" line. As if who I dated was a business merger. As if love needed to be filtered through a brand strategy. "I'm not a spokesperson, Dad," I replied. "I'm a person. I'm allowed to care about someone." He shook his head like I was a child. "You don't understand how this works. People talk. Investors notice. You're associated with the Parker brand whether you like it or not. I wanted to scream. But instead, I asked, what exactly do you think is so wrong with him? He scoffed. He's a nobody. He has no money, no education. He draws on sidewalks and lives in a shoebox apartment. Is that the kind of future you want? My face went hot. He's the kindest person I've ever met. He makes me feel alive. He listens to me. He doesn't care about my last name. That alone makes him more valuable than half the people you work with. He stood up then, pacing the room. I'm not going to argue with you. I'm going to give you a choice. Either you end this thing, this fantasy, or you forfeit everything. The apartment, the trust, your name in the will. You'll be on your own. I looked at him and saw a man who had built an empire out of fear. Fear of failure, fear of loss, fear of emotion. He didn't want a daughter. He wanted a legacy. And Jake? He didn't fit into the Parker equation. I left without responding. My mind was racing. My chest was tight. That day, I didn't go to Jake's place. I couldn't. I needed to think. I walked through the city for hours, numb to the honking, the people, the rain. I ended up in Central Park, sitting on a rock near Bethesda Fountain, soaking wet and completely unsure of what to do. I was angry, furious at my father, furious at myself for letting it get this far without telling Jake the truth. So I did something I hadn't done since I was 16. I took the subway. No car, no driver. I got on the L train. Eyes red, coat soaked through, and headed straight for Brooklyn. Jake answered the door barefoot, his hands covered in red and blue paint. "Haley," he said, instantly concerned. "Are you okay?" I walked inside and just stood there. For the first time since I met him, I was trembling. "I have to tell you something," I said. And then it all came out. The truth. The whole truth. I told him who I really was. Haley Parker, heiress to one of the biggest real estate fortunes in New York. I told him about my family, about the penthouse, the money, the pressure, the silence I'd lived in for years. I told him about the photos, about the meeting with my father, about the ultimatum. I laid it all bare, afraid that when I finished, he'd look at me differently, like everyone else did. But he didn't. He listened. And when I was done, he didn't yell. He didn't storm out. He just sat on the floor across from me, quiet. "You lied," he finally said. Not shouting, just hurt. "I know," I whispered, eyes full of regret. "I wasn't trying to hurt you. I was trying to protect something that felt real. I was scared that if you knew everything, you wouldn't see me anymore." He ran a hand through his hair, his jaw tight. "I wish you would have trusted me." "I do," I said. "More than anyone." He looked up at me then, his expression softening. "So what are you going to do?" And I realized I hadn't answered that question for myself yet. My father's ultimatum hung in the air like a weight on my shoulders. I didn't want to lose Jake, but I also didn't know what it meant to walk away from everything I'd ever known. The apartment, the trust fund, the comfort, but also the control, the loneliness, the expectations. "I don't know," I said truthfully, "but I can't keep living in both worlds." We sat in silence after that. Not angry, just heavy. The next few days were hard. Jake pulled back a little, not because he didn't care, but because he needed space. and I gave it to him. I spent those days thinking, journaling, walking through neighborhoods I'd never been in before. I talked to no one. I just listened to the city, to myself. One night, I found myself back in the park where we first met. I sat on that same bench, hoodie pulled over my head, and just breathed. That's when I saw him, Jake, standing across the street with a coffee in one hand and a sketch pad in the other. He crossed slowly and sat beside me. "I don't care how much money you have," he said. "I care about you, but I need to know you're choosing me, not just escaping something else." My eyes filled. "I'm choosing you, but I'm also choosing me for the first time in my life." He nodded. "Okay then." It wasn't a proposal. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was two people deciding to try to build something honest in a world that had lied to them both. But the story didn't end there, because when you leave one world for another, that old world doesn't let go easily. They say the heart wants what it wants. But what they never tell you is that sometimes the heart also wants comfort, familiarity, and safety. And when those things stand in direct opposition to love, that's when the real war begins. That's where I found myself, standing in the middle of two lives I had built, one with concrete, walls, and designer furniture, and the other with paint-splattered dreams and raw, unpredictable truth. Both were real. Both were mine. But only one could survive. After that night on the park bench, things moved fast. My father wasn't used to being disobeyed, and when I didn't respond to his calls or texts, he decided to escalate. The next day, I came home to find my access to the penthouse shut off. My keycard didn't work. The doorman, who had known me since I was 16, apologized and handed me an envelope. Inside was a letter, cold, clinical, and legally precise. My father had officially cut me off. I wasn't shocked. Deep down, I knew it was coming. But knowing didn't make it hurt any less. I didn't cry. Not at first. I walked the streets of Manhattan like a ghost, feeling invisible in a city that never noticed much anyway. It was late fall, and the air had that crisp bite that smelled like burning, firewood and roasted, peanuts from sidewalk carts. I had nowhere to go. My name, my money, my lifestyle, all gone in a single decision. And yet, somewhere beneath the numbness was a strange sense of freedom. Like I had just taken off a pair of heels that were 2 sizes too small. The pain lingered, but so did the relief. Jake was shocked when I showed up at his apartment with a duffel bag and nowhere else to go. He stood in the doorway for a full minute, blinking like he was trying to process what was happening. "You really did it," he whispered. "I had to," I said. I couldn't live a lie anymore. He didn't say anything. He just pulled me in and held me like I was something breakable. And for a while the next few weeks were messy. I slept on his futon, helped him clean up his studio, tried to learn the rhythm of a life that didn't revolve around board, meetings and benefits. But the truth is, I struggled. I didn't know how to live without a safety net. I didn't know how to budget for groceries, or how to ride the subway without feeling like a tourist. My phone plan got canceled. My credit card stopped working. I had to go to the DMV and get a state ID for the first time in years. It was humbling and exhausting. Jake never made me feel small, but I could tell he was worried. He worked double shifts, sometimes at a gallery, sometimes at a local cafe, just to keep up with the bills. I tried to find work, but my resume was more about charity galas than actual skills. Nobody wanted to hire someone who used to run a nonprofit just because her dad paid for it. I remember one night, after a particularly rough day of job hunting, I broke down in the kitchen. "I don't belong here," I sobbed, leaning against the counter. I thought I could do this. I thought I was strong enough. Jake came over and wrapped his arms around me. "You are strong, but this isn't about strength. It's about choice. You didn't just give up comfort. You gave up your whole identity. That takes guts. But what if I made the wrong choice?" I whispered. He pulled back just enough to look at me. "Do you love me?" I nodded, tears spilling. "More than anything." "Then you didn't make the wrong choice." But the doubt didn't go away. Not completely. It lived in the small things, the way I missed having clean laundry delivered. The quiet ache for the kind of breakfast that came on silver trays. I hated that I missed those things. I hated that I missed a world that had tried to control me. But comfort has claws, and it doesn't let go easy. Then came the letter. It arrived in a thick, cream-colored envelope with the Parker family crest embossed on the front. My hands shook when I opened it. Inside was a note from my father's lawyer, an invitation to a final meeting. One chance to reclaim my place in the family. One chance to come home. No strings attached, it said. But I knew better. Jake read it over my shoulder. "Are you going to go?" "I don't know," I said. But I did. I had to. I needed to face him. I needed to look the man who raised me in the eye and tell him who I had become. The meeting was held in his office, of course. Same glass walls. Same cold air. He stood when I entered but didn't smile. "You look different," he said. "Tired, thinner." "Living in the real world will do that," I replied. He didn't respond, just gestured for me to sit. And then he made his pitch. He offered me everything back, my name, my access, even a corner office in the company if I wanted it. "No conditions," he said. "Just come home." I looked at him, this man who had shaped my life with spreadsheets and expectations. And I realized something. He would never change. He didn't understand that what I had done wasn't rebellion, it was survival. I didn't leave to punish him. I left to find me. "I'm not coming back," I said, voice steady. He stared at me, confused. "You'd rather throw your life away for a starving artist?" "I'd rather build a new life with someone who sees me." His face hardened. "You'll regret this." "Maybe," I said. "But at least it'll be my regret." I walked out of that office lighter than I had ever felt. Jake was waiting for me outside, leaning against a light post, coffee in hand. I walked up to him, took the cup, and kissed him right there on the sidewalk. "You didn't have to come," I said. He smiled. "I wanted to see which version of you walked out." I looked him in the eye. "The real one." We stood there for a moment, surrounded by the noise and rush of the city. Yellow cabs, steam vents, strangers moving past us in every direction. But I felt still, like I was finally grounded, finally home.